Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Real Science Exchange, the pubcast where leading scientists and industry professionals meet over a few drinks to discuss the latest ideas and trends in animal nutrition. In this episode, we're joined by the speakers of a symposia that will be presented later today, and we are at the 2025 ADSA meetings, and the title of this symposia is going to be Creating Carbon-Friendly Cows and Leveraging Omics to improve the sustainability of dairy production. We'll explore omics technologies, including genomics and metabolomics. I'm going to say that again. We'll explore omics technologies, including genomics and metabolomics, and see how we can breed dairy cows with lower methane emissions to meet net zero greenhouse gas goals by 2050. The speakers will discuss genetic selection and feed efficiency strategies to enhance dairy sustainability. So we've got one of the speakers. We've got Dr. Jocelyn Johnson from STgenetics. Welcome, Jocelyn.
Hi, thanks for having me
Yeah,
today.
very welcome. Why don't you start off by kind of just giving us your pedigree? Where'd you go to school? Where'd you grow up? Those kinds of things.
Yeah, so I am born and raised in Texas. Unfortunately, haven't got to explore outside of there much yet, but
What part of Texas?
South Texas. So I'm actually from the area around San Antonio, but I've been in College Station at Texas A&M now. I was telling earlier that I'm an inbred Aggie at this point. I had 3 degrees. They kept me in College Station and then ended up working in College Station now. So really, College Station is my home, and my research and grad programs were focused on ruminant nutrition and exploring feed efficiency and prediction of feed efficiency, and that kind of transferred directly into what I ended up being hired and currently today do at STgenetics, which is managing our livestock research and sustainability programs.
And where is that research center at? It's down there in Texas.
Yeah, so we have multiple research facilities really around the globe, but in Texas, where I'm based, we have our beef and beef on dairy research facilities. So we measure about 1,200 animals at a time for feed efficiency, production, and then we retain ownership on those all the way through the feeding period, collect all that carcass data to identify sires that exhibit, traits in the progeny that we were wanting to select for, and also develop genomic testing capacities in those populations. And then in Ohio, just down the road from where we're at today, we have kind of functions as a commercial dairy operation, but it's where we do all of our internal genetic selection and creating the genetics that we sell to our customers. And then also we collect research in those dairy Holstein cattle. And then in the UK, we have a similar to Texas kind of setup where we're collecting some beef and beef on dairy data.
Okay, very well. So your title of the talk is Advancing Dairy Sustainability Through Feed Efficiency Genetics and Genomics Research Insights and Applications. So give me just kind of an overview of the talk that you're going to give here later today. The economics of feeding Reassure precision release choline. Reassure is fed during the transition period, and because it's fed for such a short period of time, it costs just $15 per cow. And yet the benefits will continue to generate income throughout the year. Cows fed Reassure produce 5 pounds more colostrum, which pays for your Reassure investment on the very first day of lactation. Cows fed Reassure also produce 5 pounds more milk per day, every day. That means after the first day, every day is payday. Invest in Reassure during the transition period and recoup your investment on the very first day of lactation. After that, you got it, payday.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted being in a unique space, kind of being more in the commercial side of the industry, right? We focus a lot on our customers, which are the producers, and what are the tools that we can provide to them to help them be better at what they're doing, right? And so my goal was to kind of focus on, what data have we collected? What does that data show? And then how do we apply that to our producers to help them be better? And being in the world of sustainability, really all of our producers are already, their goal is to be sustainable, right? They want to be economically profitable so that they can continue being around, that, their sons and daughters can take over the farm one day. And while doing that, trying to be good stewards of the resources that they have. And so we kind of see the two of them being mutually beneficial to everything that we do and trying to help our customers.
So can you talk a little bit about the research that you're actually doing?
Yeah, so at SD, we're always trying to build and create new tools and technologies from a genetic standpoint, right? The bread and butter of our company is to sort semen and to sell genetics to customers. And so my project and programs that we manage really focus on developing an index to improve feed efficiency through a trait called residual feed intake. And so those research facilities that we talked about, we're focusing on making sure we have individual intake information and are able to use that to identify those animals that are more feed efficient or less feed efficient so that our producers can then use genomic tools to select for those that are more favorable.
So talk to me, what does residual feed efficiency or feed intake mean?
Yep, yep. So residual feed intake, it's kind of a big, long sounding word, but essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to create a trait that is going to give us animals that, without an impact on milk production, consume less feed. So we can think about it, just feed efficiency is what we're after, right? We want to produce more milk for every unit of feed. But when we put that into a selection index, we need it to be uncorrelated with other traits we're trying to select for, right? In general, as cows eat more, or as cows produce more milk, they need to eat more feed. But the difference is that some, say we have two cows that are producing 100 pounds of milk, one may be consuming 20 pounds less than another, and we want to be able to identify who that is, and residual feed intake allows us to do that.
Okay. And then what kind of variation are you seeing in feed efficiency? Because to me, that is going to be the secret sauce to reducing carbon per unit of milk, right? And
Yep.
so, how much variation do you see in a population?
Yeah, it's really interesting because the variation across our dairy heifers versus our dairy cows versus our beef and beef on dairy is all really pretty much the same. And if we go out into any pen of animals, we're going to find two cows or two beef animals that are the same body size and producing the same amount of milk or growing, the same number of pounds per day. And one's going to consume upwards of 20 to 25% less feed. So that's kind of the variability that we have to play with. And because we really haven't had the tools for very long to select for this, we really haven't, started to make progress. And so I'm not a geneticist. I pretend to be one, but geneticists love variability, and we have a lot of that in this trait because it hasn't been heavily selected for.
So when calculating the carbon footprint of that, so if there's a 25% difference, is there also then a 25% difference in carbon per unit of milk?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to kind of take it back for a moment. When we introduced and really at the inception of the research, so we've been collecting this data since around 2011. Our CEO met a Brahman producer that was selecting for this trait, and they collected data on the progeny of those females that were selected, and they were actually more efficient. Super small sample size. Couldn't tell if it was, what the technical heritability of it was, but it was obvious that the females in the next generation were more efficient. So he invested significantly into the ability to collect for that, knowing that that would be the trait of the future to help our producers, right? We know 50% of our costs are going to feed. So fast forward that to when, we finally developed that index, started to introduce it to producers, we never brought up the word carbon, because at that point in time in the industry, they really would be in a defensive mindset about that, if that were to come up. But we started doing research in around 2020 because we understand that the carbon footprint is heavily tied to how much they consume. Both manure emissions, enteric emissions, and feed production emissions all correlate and correspond to that, total consumption. So with this index, we're selecting animals that eat less but produce the same amount of milk. They then have that subsequent reduction in carbon emissions, like you just asked. And we have completed some projects now with UC Davis and Texas A&M that I'll share data on. And in this presentation that validates and confirms that connection between improving the feed efficiency and reducing that carbon foot simultaneously.
So I don't know a lot about genetics, but I know that you talk about heritability and of certain traits. And where would the heritability of feed efficiency rank among some of the other heritable traits?
Yeah, that's a great question. Anything that we're selecting for, we want to make sure is a useful trait, right? That it's actually going to make progress. And standard traits that we select for milk production, fat, protein, those milk components are going to be heritability around 20%. The heritability of our feed efficiency index, which we publish as EcoFeed, has a heritability around 30% across the different populations. And so I always just kind of say it's at or better than traits that we're already used to selecting for, and that we've already made significant progress by selecting for those traits. So we're confident that if we incorporate this into selection, we will create cows that are more feed efficient.
Yeah, interesting. So one thing I realized I failed to do, and that's introduce my co-host here, Dr. Ryan Pralle. The other thing, you haven't done many podcasts with me, but one thing you got to know is that sometimes I get carried away and you got to elbow yourself in. So
Sounds good.
yeah, no worries. But I do have a question for you, and then I'll turn it over to you. But you are very familiar with a very famous cow that was producing a lot of milk. Do you know anything about her feed efficiency? How much dry matter intake was she consuming? Do you have any of those data?
We don't sell sells Pralle Aftershock 3918. The claim to fame for my family now, it sells Pralle Dairy in central Wisconsin. We don't have individual feed intake data on that cow, but when she's making over 220 pounds of milk per day, I'd be very curious to see how much she was eating and how well she's able to convert that, because that's a tremendous amount of dry matter intake in order to support that. To build off our ongoing conversation here, Jocelyn, are you guys measuring the enteric emissions from these cows in order to create a selection index as well?
Yeah, so in 2020, we kind of started going down this road of is there an impact on emissions? And if so, how do we validate that impact? And so we did a trial with Texas A&M, sent them heifers, just divergently selected for our EcoFeed trait, found that they were more feed efficient, they did produce less methane, and that was a small university setting type study. And so at that point in time, we decided to go ahead and purchase 10 green feed units to expand that validation ability. So today and for the last 2 to 3 years, we've been collecting that emissions data on an individual animal level across our beef on dairy, and Holstein populations. So everything that gets feed intake tested has a chance to go and get emissions data collected off of them as well.
And how does that compare? Would there be a particular advantage for selecting for an emission trait directly versus feed efficiency?
Yeah, so, this is a concept that we, internally discuss a lot. Like I said, we are always trying to bring new and exciting developments and technologies that our customers can utilize to become better. And we had asked ourselves that question, what are the traits that are actually going to be the most important to make, the most sustainable cow in the future, right? And when we actually analyzed that data, so we do have a genomic evaluation for methane in lactating cows today. We don't currently publish it for producers because we're still in that exploratory stage. Is this beneficial to them or not? And what our models are showing us today is that if we incorporate that direct methane selection into our, profitability index that we select for today, which is going to be heavily favoring production and feed efficiency, along with some form and function traits, we actually end up with cows that, although they produce less methane per day to a small extent, they also produce less milk. And in the long term, when we look, first, second, third, all the way to the 7th generation, by that 7th generation, those animals are producing over 400 kilograms less milk in their lifetime. And the emissions intensity is actually more favorable for the selection that didn't include direct methane. And so we're big advocates of following the data. And today the data is telling us that if we actually incorporated direct methane selection, we would actually create animals that have a higher carbon footprint than if we continue driving selection for those traits that also impact the bottom line of the producer the most. And so that's where we're focused today.
Do you happen to have like a dollars and cents value put onto that?
Yeah, so I mean, if we think about that seventh generation of them producing over 400 kilos less milk in today's milk prices, that would be $180 less revenue that we would be generating off of those cows. If we kind of take that back and we break it down to say, okay, based on the absolute carbon reduction, et cetera, what does the carbon price have to be to justify that? And the carbon price would have to be over 450 tons per ton, $450 per ton of carbon, to end up in making it worthwhile to incorporate that into the selection. And again, that would be only if on an absolute emissions basis, not if we're factoring those on an emissions intensity basis. And so we just want to look at it from that holistic approach in our mind, right? And when we think about genetic selection, I always kind of give the disclaimer, we really are trying to create the cow of the future, right? And, we don't know what the future of the carbon outlook is, but we do know that the future involves cows that need to produce milk to feed our world, and they need to eat a significant amount of feed to do that, right? And if we can continue to drive traits like productivity, feed efficiency, form and function, we're going to be guaranteed to be creating a better cow in the future, and that cow in the future in those same models is producing over 20% less carbon, right? So we are achieving reduced carbon footprint. We just don't need that direct methane trait to accomplish it.
Absolutely. And when you say that, that's on the intensity basis, right? The amount of carbon going out per pound of milk.
Correct.
When you're looking at these animals that genotypically are better at feed efficiency, is there any correlation between the phenotype? Do they look different? Those cows that are more feed efficient?
Do they get green spots?
If we have any fluffy tail advocates here, one of our most feed efficient animals was a very favorable show cow back in the day, but just by coincidence, no. There's, we always kind of joke with our producers, like if you see a name on a tag out in a pen, that's a favorite cow, But we can't look at that cow and tell you if she's the most feed efficient in your herd or not, right? And if we were to try to visually select for this, we would accomplish nothing.
Yeah.
Except for selecting for pretty cows, which isn't wrong.
We're very good at that.
Depending on your goals.
Yeah, for sure. Another question I had, there are some feed additives out there that are purported to reduce methane, and I'm kind of curious if you had any of that in any of your treatments, and if there's any genetic interaction with maybe some of these feed additives.
That's a really interesting point. So no, short answer, we have not currently looked at those type of feeding trials. We have had some conversations with companies to see if they would be interested in partnering with us on some research in that area based on, additional feed additives that, are more standard practice in the industry that might be used, in a feedlot setting, et cetera. We don't see interactions in any of those in our standard practice today. So we wouldn't expect per se a huge interaction, but we do know that the rumen microbiome is different between our high and low feed efficient animals. And so depending on how those, feed additives are working and functioning, there could end up being some slight, but generally we think of it as being an additive benefit that, you can select for this trait, get the improved feed efficiency, lower your carbon footprint, and you could also add on to that, an intervention of some sort of feed additive if you wanted to get further gains and reduce the average, even further.
So you have any insights into the correlation between animals that are genomically more feed efficient and then the microbiome, what that correlation might be?
Yeah, so feed efficiency is a very complex trait. So like I said, we have research that we've done internally. We also know that there's a lot of historic research that has, looked at the impact of RFI and the microbiome environment and found similar findings where, some of those more fiber loving microbes and methane producing microbes may be in, different concentrations across those populations. But feed efficiency is also regulated by a lot of other things. So, other digestibility later down the tract, behavior, etc., are all impacting. So it's hard to give a black and white answer to the solution in the
Well,
microbiome.
rarely are there many black and white answers in science, but
You always have a right answer if you answer with it depends.
right, exactly. Um, any big rocks that we haven't covered yet that you're going to be talking about in your presentation?
I think we kind of covered those. I mean, we just wanted to introduce the data, be able to show that, selecting for the things we already are selecting for, especially if we incorporate that feed efficiency, really is driving substantial improvements in both profitability and the environmental footprint. And this is the direction we want to continue to push for, and that there's huge opportunity to make improvement in the industry. I'm curious to kind of hear y'all's take or what you're hearing, more on the maybe producer side of the window when you think about these topics, or if somebody were to come to you and, you know, say that you need to implement this in your cows, kind of what is your gut reaction?
I think the way that you've presented it, where we can get this kind of 1-2 punch benefit for having more sustainable cows by having more feed efficient cows, I think that sells pretty well, especially as people are concerned about feed costs or maybe even a limited land base. That's a very attractive proposition, I think.
I think the whole feed efficiency story, for years, the dairy industry really didn't take a look at feed efficiency. I'm not sure why. When we had, the swine and poultry, they were really focused on that. It seems like it's just now, I say just now, but in maybe the last decade, we've been starting to talk a lot more about feed efficiency in dairy. So I think the market is very right to be able to listen to that. And if you've got a way to change that, I think they'll be very open-minded to it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean honestly, and kind of following up on that comment there, what we struggled with a lot in the beginning of introducing this to producers was the way that I word this. You can get the same amount of production with less feed. When you say less feed to a producer, it seems negative because we're so ingrained to believe that our cows need to consume a lot of feed in order to produce a lot of milk, and they do. But the difference is that you already have those cows today that are consuming less, or we could flip that to be more producer friendly and say they're producing more milk per unit of feed, right? You're getting more milk production on that same amount of feed. And like you said, we aren't getting more land, right? Land values in our area are insane, and we need to do more with less. And that's, in our mind, the key to sustainability.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. As we kind of get ready to kind of close out here, what I'd like to ask you guys to do is kind of give me a couple key takeaways from the conversation today, and then we'll close it out. Ryan, you got a few things you'd like to stress to the audience?
Our last call question is sponsored by AminoSure XM Precision Release Methionine, the next generation in amino acid balancing. With AminoSure XM, you can save up to 5 cents per cow per day on your methionine investment. Try it today and receive an additional 2.5 cents per cow per day savings with Balchem's limited time rebate offer. Contact your Balchem representative to learn more.
Sustainable cows are efficient cows.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Don't think you need to say much else. Jocelyn, anything to add to that?
Short spoken is not my problem. No, I think that's perfect. At the end of the day, when we think about these carbon interventions and trying to be more environmentally sustainable, the key is really following the data and following what's actually real and is applicable in a commercial operation. And we can't give up profitability, production, and so forth to do that. And so finding traits like this that are mutually beneficial is an important way that we're going to accomplish these things.
All right. Well, listen, thank you for all you do. Thank you for joining us here today. It's been very interesting and enlightening. Ryan, the other thing I failed to mention is that you're a newly minted Balchem employee.
Yes.
So welcome aboard. To our loyal audience out there, thank you for coming along once again. We hope you learned something. Hope you had some fun, and I hope to see you next time here at the Real Science Exchange, where it's always happy hour and you're always among friends.
We'd love to hear your comments or ideas for topics and guests, so please reach out via email to anh.marketing@balchem.com with any suggestions, and we'll work hard to add them to the schedule. Don't forget to leave a 5-star rating on your way out. You can request your Real Science Exchange t-shirt in just a few easy steps. Just like or subscribe to the Real Science Exchange and send us a screenshot along with your address and t-shirt size to anh.marketing@balchem.com. Balchem's Real Science Lecture Series of webinars continues with ruminant-focused topics on the first Tuesday of every month, monogastric-focused topics on the second Tuesday of each month, and quarterly topics for the companion animal segment. Visit balchem.com/realscience to see the latest schedule and to register for upcoming webinars.